Good morning, friends, and welcome viewers. This is CEC-UGC EduSat network, and we are running now a program on Indian writing in English. And in this program, we have started from the 19th century onwards, when English came to India in a big way, and people in India started using English as a medium of expression. And it produced a large number of writers, thinkers, activists, social reformers, and we have so far done more than 25 lectures, and we are closing, in fact, this month this program, that is concluding it, so that another program of the same magnitude can be started later. In this program today, we have the topic Jotiba Phule, pioneering reform. And this great person of India lived in the 19th century. All of you would be aware about the name and the role that he played, and the perspective that he gave to Indian writing in English at the content level. Basically, he was a social reformer, as is clear from the title. And we have in the resource person Professor Nagpal, who teaches English in Janki Devi Mahavidyalaya, Delhi University, and she is a person of repute. She has published books. She has spoken on occasions of importance. She has attended conferences, and she is a theatre person. And she thinks, afresh, and gives us a lot of, food for thought. So I look forward to her taking over on this topic, that she'll be sharing her views with you. So welcome, Dr. Nagpal, and please give the lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. Today's lecture is on Jotiba Phule, and this lecture will be divided into three parts. Part one will, in the first part, we'll be giving you important information regarding Jotiba Phule's life, and the second part will focus on some important works written by Phule, such as Gulamgiri, his memorial address to the Education Commission, and so on. And the third part will, briefly focus on the implications and relevance of his work today. So I begin with the first part, which is on his life. Phule was born somewhere, around 1827, 1828, and he died in 1890. Which means, as Professor Prakash just rightly pointed out, that he lived through the 19th century, and he contributed to the making of 19th century India in a very meaningful manner, because this is the time period of reform, and I think the spark of reform, and as this lecture is aptly titled Pioneering Reform, started with Jotiba Phule. He was born in a village called Lalgun village in Satara district. And as G.P. Deshpande points out, that his original family name was Gorhe. In terms of discriminatory caste system, Phule belonged to the social group of the Mali, and this was relegated and considered to be a lower one in terms of the Varna division. We all know that in those days society was divided in terms of the Varnas. So this information is very important to understand the kind of anxieties that Jotiba Phule had as a thinker, what led the circumstances that shaped his thought process and led him to be a thinker of a certain kind, who went ahead to subvert the system itself. So he was greatly influenced by the European reform movements, and the revolution of 1848 particularly had left a very significant impact on Phule's psyche, and he was of course very influenced by Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. So there was change that was happening in Europe, and that totally destroyed the old entrenched structures, and this wind of change, in a sense, impacted Phule in a big way. So he imbibed the spirit of reformism, and he reacted in a very sensitive way to his own environment, it wasn't as if these were just thoughts that he could not put into practice, but the practical aspect of whatever he believed in and whatever he imbibed from change and reform happening in other countries remained central to Phule's own understanding of his immediate environment. And this, of course, this environment was very, very majorly fraught with biases and prejudices on the basis of caste. And here, I will also refer to Radha Kumar's work, called The History of Doing, an illustrated account of women's rights and feminism in India, in which she points out how Phule was the person to actually open a home in which unmarried women and widows could give birth to illegitimate children in secret, and I'll also be discussing this in some detail a little later. So he opened a school for girls of the lowest orders, who were referred to as terms that are no longer in practice, but at that point of time, Shudras, Nati Shudras. And in 1848, another one for girls of all social groups in 1851, which meant that not only was Phule struggling against the structure of caste, but he was also fighting, on the front of gender. And he was very concerned about the fact that these women would either, kill their children in the womb, or once these children were born, he would probably kill these children. She would, the mothers would probably kill these children, and this was something that concerned Phule greatly, which is why he opens this home in which the women can come and give birth to the children in secret. Both Jotiba and Savitribai Phule taught in this school, and he later started, an evening school for working people in 1855. The ambit remained acceptable, as he felt that it was more important for women to be educated so that they could further educate their children. The whole issue of, in a sense, rationality and the whole issue of rationality and the issue that why is it that women should be educated. So going by the fact that we are talking about 19th century India, one of the arguments in favor of women's education remained that they could then educate their children. So even though today we might question this and say that women need to be educated for themselves and not simply for kind of bringing up their children, but in the 19th century India, this was a very valid argument, and it allowed, and because of the prevalence of this kind of argument, Phule could actually put forth his ideas on the education of women. And he says that Radha Kumar mentions and says that this was because he felt that irrespective of caste, all women in a sense were considered to be an inferior category. That where we talk about a society that is divided very, very strongly on the basis of caste, but when it comes to women, in a sense that the understanding that they do not belong to any social caste, so to say, because women remain the marginalized entities. And this is why Phule opens these two kinds of schools. One, of course, for girls who are from the lower orders in society, and the other one was for girls from all social groups. Here again, one needs to mark how a thinker like Phule understood reform, which he very clearly outlined reform at two very distinct levels. One, of course, caste discrimination. So he immediately reacted against caste discrimination, and his own efforts at this. For instance, he opened up the water tank at home to people who were considered in those days to be the untouchables, and this was a very revolutionary act, and of course his own father was very concerned about him, but at the same time both Phule and his wife Savitribai Phule, they had to leave their house because of this. So the second thing for him was reform when understood at the level of gender, as I just pointed out, that his efforts at opening schools and homes where women could come and study, or if they had other issues. So this was a very radical reformist step, And when we look at this in the context of a world that is still not, and of course India was under the the British domination. So at that point of time, to understand reform coming from within is a very, very significant aspect of 19th century India and of Phule's effort towards, as I said, the making of this India. Again, extending this argument related to both at the level of gender and caste, I will just discuss Phule's opinion to a note that was written by Mr. B.M. Malabari on infant marriage in India. And this note was written by Phule somewhere in 1884. And note number 1. And 10 years later, Phule responds to this. He says that he talks about the cruel system of infant marriages and the socio-economic reasons for doing the same. He considers the plight of the child bride as worse than that of the American slave. And he says that she is more heavily loaded with work than the American slaves. This is a quote from Phule's response. And he says that these women are absolutely, even if they come from good families and they marry into other families, they are not kept properly, they are not well fed. So their condition in a sense remains very, very pathetic. So much so that they just spend their entire day doing their work and end up reach a stage where they end up almost losing their lives, and some of the women are pushed to commit suicide, and this crime is totally hushed up. And it's important that Phule uses the word crime against women, because it's not something that he sees as part of her growing up or her life and her having had children that leads to the death, but the fact that women are not kept properly and they are not even given the basic amenities and of proper clothing, proper food, proper rest. So this in a sense kind of leads them to conditions which according to Phule are more pathetic than even the slaves in America. And he recognizes here the need for the government to actually introduce compulsory measures to look into the plight of women, because he says without the intervention of the government, it's not going to be possible for women to actually emerge out of this. And he presses upon the then English government and to pass a ruling that boys not less than 19 and girls not less than 11 they should not be allowed to marry. So he says that failing which, if a case like this happens, a tax should be levied on the parents, and the money that is collected should be used for the education of people of the middle and the lower orders. Now here 2 or 3 things in a sense come together. One, of course, we've been talking about discrimination at the level of caste, then the category of women and how they are totally relegated to the margins. Closely associated with this is the understanding that education is very important, and more so for women, of course, than for the others, because the others, even from the middle and lower orders, might stand a chance to be educated, but the chances in the case of women dwindle further. So it's important that women receive an education, and we can see how this his plea that there should be a rule about marriages, and he says how this actually the failing which a tax should be levied and the money collected from that should then be used for purposes of education. So this was he was certainly way ahead of his time, and he was thinking in a very, very rational manner. And the important aspect of Phule's life is that he's responding to his own immediate context and he's engaging with it. So if he's writing or if he's talking about any kind of literary aspect, that is something that is closely related to the social context to which he belongs, and he uses his ability to write to improve the society to which he belongs. Here I'd also request Dr. Prakash to please comment on these aspects of Phule's life.
No, the way you have emphasized, Dr. Payal Nagpal, the fact that women's education and social reform are so very well interlinked that one can't exist without the other. So you take the women's cause very seriously. You bring in education, and education I don't think is important for women in the 19th century anywhere else as much as it was there in India. And we had Jotiba Phule for us.
Yes.
And I don't think that there are many people devoted to this cause elsewhere, except a few countries like England. So it's really very inspiring. And the point that you have made regarding Jotiba Phule is that he is a person from the grassroots. He is a person who looks at things at the level of layers. So there is a layer of the lower caste women. He opens specially schools for them, and then there is another category that is of women all over the classes. So he opens schools for them also. And this marriage connected with critique of marriage connected with women's backwardness and all these things. This is very important.
Yes.
Which means that he's not just a theorist. He is not just a thinker. That he is a person who studies problems at the level of the ground, and from there he works. So these are the points that you have made very well, and in fact he is a very sharp person. The way he is terming certain things as crimes against women in the 19th century.
Yes.
So must have been welcomed a great deal by people, and would be very inspiring, and would be, I think, under constant attack from the 19th century orthodox centers.
Yes.
What do you say?
Yes, certainly under attack from orthodox centers, and yet at the same time a source of complete inspiration to people who were engaged with reform in those days. And this is what actually makes the whole idea of reform very central to 19th century India. And Phule, of course, pioneers this. There's no doubt about it.
You use the word radical for reform, which is a very, very important term. So he is in fact bringing in reform very crucially. So in fact, they are more than reforms.
Yes.
It's a changing of attitudes. What do you say?
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's such a realistic attitude to adopt. He's very, very critical of the elite male who, because of whose very licentious behavior. It's the women from the lower orders, or even at times the upper orders, who end up with children that they want to kill or not really give birth to. So they end up with injuries on themselves, and when they do have these children, so this whole idea of actually having a house where they can actually come and in secrecy and deliver their children it's just totally way ahead of its time. And Phule would have surely taken on a lot with this kind of setup.
Which means he is also critical of the elites, as you say.
Yes, he's very critical of the elites. He's extremely critical of the elites, and in fact he holds them responsible for a lot of these ills.
This is very interesting. Yes.
So moving on from this to another note that was written by Mr. B.M. Malabari on enforced widowhood, and here again Phule responds. He discusses the home that he had created, that I was just talking about, for women who came to deliver their illegitimate children, and he cites a case of a case that he encounters, a real-time case of a Brahmin widow, Kashibai, who became pregnant and then killed her newborn infant. And on hearing this, he started the foundling house that we are talking about. And the statistics here are very interesting, because he states that 35 widows came to deliver. Of course, out of these 35 children, only 5 survived, as the rest of the 30 had been subject to injuries while in the womb, because this the social gaze, the impossibility of survival for women was very sharply felt in those days, and women were under constant scrutiny. So he's sharply critical of the practices of what he calls the RN institution, and he says that it allows the privileged male to engage in licentious practices and also contract diseases. And at the same time, however, if the wife steps out, the husband is always very suspicious, and he punishes her, treats her badly. On his death, on the husband's death, that is, the woman is stripped of all she has, but the male, faces no such rule. So he's very critical of the then existing institution of marriage and the way it functions. So after the, and here I quote Phule, he writes, after the death of this wicked man, his young and beautiful woman is not allowed by the same RN institution to remarry. She is stripped of her ornaments. She is forcibly shaved by her near relatives. She is not well fed. She is not properly clothed. She is not allowed to join pleasure parties, marriages, or religious ceremonies, quote unquote. So he's extremely critical of the existing institutions and the powerful section of the society that has actually created these institutions. And he urges the English government at that time to remove what he calls the tyranny of enforced widowhood exercised upon the helpless women by the relentless system of the RN religious institution. So he says that these practices are so pathetic that some kind of intervention is essential, and he sees the presence of the English in India at that time as a liberating force that is going to help in kind of doing away with some of these practices. However, at the same time, he is also critical of the English in India for their support to the powerful sections of the society, because he says that when the government intervenes and talks about education, this education is channelized only towards the powerful people in the society, whereas the lower orders again remain where they are, and I will be discussing this in some detail a little later. So he fought for a widow remarriage and of course struck a chord with social reform movements of his time. He started what was called the Satyashodhak Samaj, somewhere around 1873, and G.P. Deshpande is correctly, he connects Phule with Gandhi and says that, in a sense, what Phule is talking about in the 19th century and his ideas on reform, his ideas on, marriage and society and so on, he says, in a sense, he anticipates Gandhi. And the Satyashodhak Samaj is actually, it's translated as the society of the seekers of truth. So we need to then ask and evolve our understanding and evolve answers on what truth really meant in 19th century India. So what was that context of truth that Phule was trying to evolve? And I think there is only one word that can connect with this idea of truth, which is change, and nothing else. The idea that there has to be change, there has to be reform for all the sections that are marginalized, be it at the level of caste, be it at the level of gender. And he too spoke about the importance that the values of truth and non-violence have, in a sense. So if we look at some of the works written by Jotiba Phule, he's written a play called Tretya Ratna. Then there's Pavara, which is a ballad, and there's a text called Slavery or Gulamgiri, as he'd written it, Cultivator's Whipcord, Satsar or the Essence of Truth, and the Book of the True Faith. So there's quite a bit that Phule has written, and in all these books he engages with everything with mythology, with the whole notion of understanding the immediate context and society in terms of belief systems and so on, and he actually discusses it in great detail in all of these works. So if we take a look at Gulamgiri or slavery, it is said that it's almost like the manifesto of the Satyashodhak Samaj and is dedicated to the good people of United States, is what Phule says. And he points out, he says that we are all aware, aware of the Chaturvarna, the four Varnas that we have, with the Brahmins at the top, and then the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas and the Shudras. Now, here Phule becomes very, very important, and he makes a huge dent in this theory of the four Varnas, and he says that there is nothing like the four Varnas. There are only people who are considered to be the elite, and he calls them these are the Brahmins, and there are people who are not the elites, and they are the Shudras. So for him, there are only two groups that exist. There is no group in the middle, and in a sense, we can then translate these two groups as people who are powerful and those who are rendered powerless. Those who are not powerless but are rendered powerless. So he's important because he subverts in a very, very rational sort of manner, this entire theory, this entire system of the four Varnas, and he challenges it. And he says that the system that we accept as a given, and we believe that this is how things always were. He says this needs to be questioned and this needs to be challenged. And he says, where did these theories about the supremacy of certain groups, really speaking, come from? And as Maya Pandit, who's also translated Phule's works, points out very well, she says that, and I quote, "It poses the problem of slavery in historicist terms. For Phule, all recorded mythology is the history of Varna struggle." So this historicization and actually, in a sense, questioning and reading back into the existing beliefs, entrenched beliefs, and not just critiquing them, but also proposing an alternative system is a very important point. And he does so historically, as she says, as Mapan says, that he's trying to historicize this idea. So as mentioned, that instead of
can you throw some light on historicization? It's a very important word. And what exactly does Maya Pandit mean when she says that he historicized?
What Maya Pandit is talking about here is that Phule's attempt to actually question the dominant so-called historical belief, which is that there are these 4 varnas and society has always been divided along these 4 lines, is something that needs to be questioned. And he gives an alternative theory to this, which is why Pandit says that Phule is not really kind of just proposing something in the air. He's actually historicizing it. And this historicization stems from the idea that there are no 4 varnas. There are only the Aryans who had invaded, and they were the aborigines.
Which means a rational understanding of history.
Yes.
And referring to it while explaining the problems of the present time.
Yes.
So things would be there in the 18th century, things would be there in the 17th century, and against them the 19th century. And because he looks at it this way, therefore he is able to convince people.
Yes. His tone, his method is always extremely rational. And he uses rational logic to actually question a lot of these beliefs that are accepted beliefs, so to say, and one does not even go beyond them to even ask that, is there anything else that is possible? And one has a tendency of believing that this is how it has always been, the whole notion of time immemorial, and it's been continuing like that. So Phule is actually one of the pioneers to make a huge dent in this entire Varna theory, and the system which one feels otherwise has been passed on from one generation to the other, and has always been like this.
Which means that he wants people to keep their eyes open and look at things rationally, not accept because they have been said by others. Yes. So he is using rationality for this purpose.
Yes.
That's a good point you are making. Yes.
So he extending this point further, he sees the Brahmins, he calls them the invaders, and he considers them to be part of the Aryan race that invaded India for its prosperity and drove the original inhabitants out. And these original inhabitants, and the term that he does use at times is the aborigines, he says that these are people who were hardy and brave. It was a very strong, tough, hard group of people, but they were kind of driven out, and they were referred to in derogatory terms such as the Shudra or the insignificant. And with this we see how the dominant structure that has been passed on, preserved in society is totally inverted in a sense, because Phule rejects it completely, and he says that there is nothing like this. And as mentioned earlier, that these 2 groups that we are talking about in a sense are not just caste groups. It's also about categorizing them as people who have power and people who do not have that power, and who are from whom that power is taken away in a sense. As I said, they're rendered powerless. So of course he then contextualizes it in terms of epic fights and the whole establishment in a sense of the Aryan race is what Phule talks about in Gulamgiri. welcome to this lecture on Jotiba Phule. We've been discussing how Phule's tracts and what he writes goes against the system, the existing system, which believed in this establishment of the Chaturvarna, the four Varna system, and as an alternative to that, Phule historicizes this and he proposes the two group system, the two Varna system, where he says you only have two categories of people, only the Brahmins and the Shudras. There are no middle categories, because you only have people who have the power and those whose power has been taken away from them. So in this context, Phule gives lots of examples, and he mentions epic fights such as wars between the Devas and Daityas, and he says that the word, he gives a very interesting interpretation of the word Rakshas, and he says that actually they are people, the Aborigines, the original inhabitants of the country were people who were protectors of the land. So they were the Rakshaks. He called them the Rakshas. And from the Rakshas, there is a distortion, and the word Rakshas is used as a derogatory. But he actually turns it around. He turns the interpretation of Rakshas as the devil, as a demon around, and proposes the Rakshas not as Rakshas but as the Rakshas, that is, people who are the protectors of land, and hence of course their name. So Phule must be credited with giving us not only an idea that functions as a complete counter to the prevailing myth of superiority of certain caste groups and social groups, but he gives us a complete and systematic methodology with this idea of the two groups that he talks about, and a systematic invasion by the Aryan race, and how the original inhabitants, and it does a very interesting thing. It also tells people that the Aryans are not the original inhabitants and they are the invaders. So and he explains this by revealing the way in which the privileged group operates in society. So how is it, he not just proposes this alternative system, but he, through his systematic rational methodology, he also explains how this new group now, the powerful one, has been able to establish itself in a certain way. And here he talks about mythology, and he says that in order to control people, the powerful group that had invaded, they invent a system of mythology, and he says that it was used to create different yardsticks in the society, and people were then compelled, and the powerful group of course said that they have this is how it has always been, and this is how it is meant to be. So whether it was education, whether it was spreading ideas of the different kinds of myths that were there, in all of these myths, in all of the mythological figures, it is the powerful people who are the glorious ones, and it is the people who are rendered powerless that they are the ones who are considered to be a so-called pollution in the society. So Phule states, and I quote him here, "They devised that weird system of mythology, the ordination of caste and the cruel and inhuman laws," quote unquote. So in the mythological scheme of things, the Brahmin had what is called the highest rights, the highest privileges and gifts, quote unquote, and the Shudra of course was seen as pollution. So this belief was perpetuated, and it gradually permeated in the society to such an extent that people started believing that this is how it always was. So apart from the fact that it does say a lot about the Varna system and the way it is exploitative and the way certain sections of the society are relegated totally to the margins and rather outside it at times, it also proposes a new methodology, a new way of using rationality to think about the problems that are there in the society. So and when I say that a new system or rationality, so for instance, how mythology is used to create certain ideas, how education is used to create certain notions that people have. So and this of course was associated with a set of rules. So for instance, any kind of injustice that was permitted by the elite group on the ordinary people, it could be forgiven, and there could be some kind of penance that could be done could be performed and the person could be forgiven. On the other hand, if the person from the lower orders committed any kind of sin, any kind of what was considered to be sin, or any kind of crime against people of the upper orders, the dominant social group, then it was considered to be a heinous crime, and it could also lead to forfeiture of the person's life. So the huge disparity in terms of the kind of law that was applied to these two different groups. So where one, because of being one group, because of being in power, was allowed to get away with just about anything, the other group was, of course, had no representation and was rendered powerless. So there was no way in which that person, that group could actually seek any kind of redressal, and in fact a severe punishment was given to the people of the lower orders. So in this context, mythology and other systems are used to fortify the position of people who are in power. This brings us to another very important aspect of Phule's writing in Ghulamgiri, which is education. And he talks about how the Brahmins established their domination, in order to perpetuate their domination, they composed what he calls several treaties which they claim to have obtained directly from God. Now, Phule is very critical of the dominant group here, and he says that this is actually a complete denigration of the omnipotent, and he says this should not happen like that. Why? Because they have kept the literary texts as their own repository in a sense, and they do not allow that education, they do not allow that knowledge to seep to the other classes. They do not allow that knowledge to seep to the lower orders, because of which it is the upper orders, it is the dominant caste that remains in control of education. And he is extremely critical of this idea, and he totally rejects it. And he says that because the Brahmin controls the system of education, he also deprives the person of the lower orders of the same. So in this way, he controls the living being of the Shudra, who is then projected again as a kind of pollution in the society. So he says that the Brahmins are very skillfully, the term he uses is skillfully concealed the true facts of their existence from people, the true facts here referring to the fact that they are not the original inhabitants, and it's the ordinary people who were the original inhabitants. This brings us to, I'll just briefly discuss some excerpts from the book called The Book of True Faith, and a point that he discusses in the Book of True Faith is related to caste differentiation. So it is in the form of a dialogue where he raises this question. He says, how does one know, one of the characters raises this question, how does one know that originally there was no caste differentiation among human beings? And Phule responds to this by saying, there is no such differentiation between birds and animals. Why would it be there among human beings? So it almost reminds us, of course, of the theory of evolution, and how human beings, of course, have evolved over a period of time. So, and here Phule is straight away giving us a very scientific example. He says that we are all creations in a sense, and if we are, then if there is no difference, there is no categorization of this sort. He says, of course, categories of the fact that somebody is two-legged and you have the four-legged animals and so on. He says you have physical characteristics that may differ. But he says there is no such division amongst birds and animals. So why would it be there amongst the human beings? And this is really, considering that, Darwin is, of course, writing mid-19th century himself. This is a very, very interesting idea, and it also shows us somewhere how Phule was greatly influenced by the reform movements abroad, and that really affected the way he wrote about some of these issues. And he tells the people of the lower orders, he says, you should not be gullible, and you should not accept these texts as a given, right? And he says that the texts have to be assessed. You have to read them, you have to assess them for what they are, and they cannot be, no text can be held as sacrosanct just because it is given to you in a sense by the elite, the upper orders. He says you should not accept any text as a given. So this, the whole idea of mythology, the whole idea of education, how it is a prerogative of a few people and the rest are led to believing what those few people are going to tell them. He says these are issues that need to be dealt with. And I mean, Phule talking about this in the 19th century, I think is really, he's way ahead of his times. So this brings us to another aspect of Phule's writing. I just mentioned that he was greatly influenced by reform movements abroad, and he had a great connect with Anglo-American thought, and he was very critical, of course, of the exploitative system of slave trade in America, and he praises who he calls the good Americans. He praises them as they helped abolish this system. He also interprets the entry of the British in India as liberating because it provides a totally different system, and he relates the presence of the British here with the reform movements that have happened abroad. And if he's in any way seeing the presence of the British here as liberating, it is because of the influx of new ideas. And we have to understand that Phule's understanding of the presence of the English in India is from that of the 19th century. So and I will just he says that and then, as luck would have it, God took pity on them and the British rule was established in India. So Phule acknowledges.
You would say that he's perhaps modernizing Indian thought at that time.
Yes.
He's pulling it out from the stranglehold of old ideas and he's giving them new interpretations.
Yes.
As I've been hearing you, for instance, you refer to interpreting mythology, and reinterpreting history, the present ideas, education system.
Yes.
It means he's a kind of a holist who looks at the whole thing from a different angle, and he believes in changing this world in his time.
Absolutely, and in fact, even when it comes to the presence of the British here in India, he's very, at one point he says that yes, it has a very liberating influence because he's looking, as you very rightly said, that he's looking at modernizing Indian thought. At the same time, a little later, he realizes that the funding that is being provided and all efforts that are going into the country are also geared towards the privileged in the society, and he's critical of that, and he says that pretty much in some of his works.
So very insightful,
yes,
in fact.
Very insightful.
He doesn't unnecessarily, oppose them or support them.
No, he doesn't do that.
He gives a critical kind of awareness.
He gives a complete critical awareness. So which is where I said that in case, when we see his comments that, he looks at the presence as liberating, it has to be looked at from the point of view of the 19th century, where he's trying to think about an India which is going to be a modern, nation state in a sense. So,
yes.
Phule acknowledges this, and he says that we must think a little more about this aspect. This relationship, with the Britishers particularly is concerned, as is rightly pointed out, with reform movements. The process of modernization in India has, in a sense, begun, and Phule's response expresses the historical contradictions of the time, and this attitude of accepting the modernity element that is coming in, but at the same time, Phule has the keen insight and awareness that that all is not well, and a lot of the efforts are again geared towards the privileged. So he had, where the British rule helped alleviate the sufferings of the low orders. The education of the low orders was totally ignored, and he keeps coming back to this point again and again, that the one thing that needs to be done by the government is channelization of resources and having a policy whereby people of the lower orders are going to receive education. He says that the privileged in any case are going to get educated. So that doesn't really help. What helps is the fact that it is the people who are of the lower orders that need to be educated. So if we look here at, in a sense, the structure of Phule's thought, he claims what we can call, a twofold agenda. So he says as much. He says that he writes all this not only to bring about awareness among Shudra brethren regarding the devious machinations of the Brahmins, but also to make the government aware about this system of high class education. So we see that, as Professor Prakash pointed out, that he sees things as layered. It's not as if he looks at things through the same lens. He has the ability to actually adopt a very realistic attitude towards the society of which he is a part. And again, that is not something that exists in isolation. It is something that that has evolved over a period of time, societies that have evolved in the course of history. So, if you look at the first point, by constantly talking to, who is he talking to in a sense? Who is his target audience? His target audience is the ordinary person. His target audience is the ordinary woman. And he says that, they are people who need to now start, becoming proactive. They are people who should now get into their own and understand that whatever they are being given is something that has to be critically looked at. So, there are so many words that we use today in the 21st century, and we can see how late 20th and 21st, early 21st century, but we can see that these words can well be applied to a lot of the ideas and attitudes that are developed by Phule. For instance, radical thought or rationality, a scientific attitude, a process of historicization. These things are being done by Phule, and that is extremely commendable. So, not only to, as mentioned earlier, not only to propose simply an alternative view that no, there are no 4 varnas and there are only 2 varnas, and to leave it at that. He does not do that. He tries to substantiate it historically. He tries to actually then sensitize people and tell them that there is more that needs to be done on their part. And he also understands that this more is possible not by simply just writing these tracts, but by also telling the people that they need to be educated. And then again, if we move to the other end of this policy, we realize how he tackles this from the point of view of the government. And he says that these two ends in a sense need to meet, that people need to be sensitized, and they will be sensitized provided there is proper intervention by the government. And here he sees education as that platform. Education becomes that connecting point which will allow these two things to merge. So, if you look at this, these ideas were actually expressed by Phule in what was called the Memorial Address for the Education Commission in 1882, and this Education Commission under the chairmanship of Sir William Hunter was appointed in 1881. So, he proposed that primary education till the age of 12 should be made compulsory, and again, these are issues that we are in a sense grappling with, and we are still trying to kind of establish some of these ideas. And he is a complete visionary who thinks ahead of his time and sees that education is that one thing that has a role to play. Now, here I would like to just read out this extract from the statement that he presents to the Commission. And I quote, "It is an admitted fact that the greater portion of the revenues of the Indian Empire are derived from the Ryot's labour, from the sweat of his brow. The higher and richer classes contribute little or nothing to the state exchequer. That the government should expend profusely a large portion of revenue thus raised on the education of the higher classes, for it is these who take advantage of it, anything but just or equitable. If we can inspire," they say, "the love of knowledge in the minds of the superior classes, the result will be a higher standard of morals in the case of the individuals, a large amount of affection for the British government, and unconquerable desire to spread among their own countrymen the intellectual blessings which they have received." So, his basic point here is that the money that is going to the, we understand the country is primarily agrarian in those days, and he says that the money that is going to the state exchequer is because of the sweat of these people. So, he says, and if we look at that, the elites in a sense contribute nothing because they are the ones who amass all that wealth. He says the fact that the government should expend on the education of the higher classes is not something that should be, that is the only thing that needs to be looked at. On the contrary, it is the education of the ordinary person, and especially if you look at it in the context of the Varna system, he talks about the Shudras. He says they are the people who need to be educated. They are the people who need to be made aware of their rights, and or simply to even go back to that point about reading a text and to become aware of what is it that is being handed down to them. So, that is possible only through education. And he talks about the fact that Phule is very critical of the fact that children of wealthy men have been educated, but he questions the contribution made by them to the great work of regenerating their fellow men. How have they begun to act upon the masses? He says that if these people are being educated, if the people of the upper orders are being educated, how have they helped in regenerating their fellow men? How have they begun to act upon the masses? And he's basically saying that they have not done this. They have not performed the role of sharing this education with everybody. They have not performed the role of developing a critical attitude in the masses. And this is the reason why Phule remains critical of the English policy of concentrating more in terms of education on people who are the privileged ones. So he says the answer to all this lies in paying more attention to primary education and to, I quote here, look a little less after higher education. He says people who will reach the level of higher education are in any case going to be able to achieve great heights. He says it's the primary education that is very, very significant, and there the base needs to be widened. More and more people need to be represented in this net of primary education. And he says that if till the time that this happens, the lower orders will continue to be duped and made a fool of by people who are powerful, and they will continue to remain marginalized. They will continue to, in a sense, accept as sacrosanct whatever they are given. So the only way in which this can be countered is by expanding not just education, but he says primary education is what needs to be expanded, in contrast to the kind of attention that is being paid to higher education. So here, and again bring in Dr. Prakash and request him to speak a little bit about this emphasis on primary education.
Oh, this is remarkable in his career, that he is looking at the whole thing from the point of view of the common masses. So a person who has read so much, who has thought so much, actually starts giving the benefit of his ideas to the lower masses, where the power lies. And in the 19th century he is able to say that all the resources in the country are being produced by the lower masses. So if the government has money to spend, it should be spent only on them and on their education. When without education, as you rightly pointed out, they can produce so much. Give them education and then they'll contribute still more. This is a kind of a vision, that is very secular. It's a vision that is very humanistic, and something that is to be relevant even today in the present circumstances. And the way you have presented him shows that he's a reformer in the best sense of the word. He is in fact literally a reformer. He is reforming. He is reconstructing things. In that literal sense, he is a reformer. Not in the sense that he doesn't believe in change. He believes in change, because he is in fact using the facilities that he has, the ideas that he has evolved for the benefit of the common masses. And when that energy is generated there, then of course the world will be a different world.
Yes, it's in fact with Phule, I think this aspect is always very pronounced. He never speaks only at the theoretical level and proposes some kind of idea or system, but he's constantly, as you rightly said, he's constantly reforming. And this new formation that he proposes, this new formation that he suggests, is something that he also realizes in real life. In the kind of work that he writes, the schools that he started, the society that he formed, and moving beyond that, also in terms of the practical aspect. Is this possible in
Could you tell us how he did it? Did he write? Did he speak to people? Or did he represent the cause of the people to the government? What did he do?
I think he worked at multiple levels, and because he of course spoke to the people, he wrote, I've already kind of read his response to the two commissions that were there. The Education Commission, his note to PM Malabari's response on widow remarriage and the education of people of the lower orders. So he worked at all these levels, and the very, very practical aspect, of course, and he's starting a school, and both he and Jotiba Phule taught in that school. So,
and he is founding an organization called Satyasodhak
Satyasodhak
Samaj.
Samaj,
Can you say something more about Satyasodhak Samaj?
Again, the idea of truth that he is trying to evolve through the Satyasodhak Samaj, and Gulamgiri in a sense is considered to be like a manifesto of the Satyasodhak Samaj, which means that reform in a sense has to be the prime agenda. And where there is a society that talks about reform, then there is a school in which these ideas are being taught to young women especially. So in that sense, you know, he's as you rightly said, he's a complete reformer. He's working at all these levels. And in fact, one of the things that he talks about a national happiness is what he says, and he sees that only through education and change of this
In
sort.
fact, you used the word
So-
intellectual blessing at one point in your
Yes.
discussion.
So, because, and he sees that through education. According to him, there is no other way that this is possible. In fact, according to him, the role of literature is very important here. And in 1885, you know, is this a little excerpt that I would like to discuss. Phule's response when he is invited to participate in the Marathi Writers' Conference in 1885. You know, he did not go for this conference, but sent a reply that was later published in the Gyanodaya. And he totally criticizes, almost chides the upper class writers for not understanding the true plight of the marginalized people. He says that he has no desire to be part of this group of writers that do not understand the concerns of the ordinary people, the downtrodden. He is very, very critical of the organizers of these conferences. He says that they do lip service to the problems of the Shudras and Ati Shudras only as long as they serve the British government and then become caste chauvinists. He states that we have nothing to gain, and I quote this, we have nothing to gain by mixing with such people. And he points to the need for, you know, the root of eternal love of all human beings, and he says this is what needs to be finally published as a text. And he's critical of these writers who, he says, make only ceremonial and meaningless speeches. So that says his understanding again of this kind of, you know, creating the structure of the conference and how people will make these elaborate speeches, but when it comes to grassroots reality, it's something that they are totally ignorant about, and they don't even try to reach out there. So he refuses to be a part of this kind of a conference. So, you know, I mean, of course, throughout we have discussed the relevance of Phule's thought even today, but we understand that even in the 21st century, Phule remains very, very relevant to us, and we need to understand the way in which ideas are produced, ideas are circulated, ideas are received, and how it is so very important when we talk about, I mean, 21st century, we talk so much about technology and change that is happening around us. So this change at the level of ideas, where even the most ordinary of persons should be able to critically assess and ask questions about whatever whatever is being handed out to them or whatever they are being given. So his Phule's reference to these factors of the production and dissemination of ideas, the relevance of education, continues to be an important aspect of our lives in the 21st century, and tracks like Gulamgiri then need to be read and reinterpreted for a better understanding of the system. And here again, I'd like to wind up by quoting from Maya Pandit, who says that one can state that the manifesto in a sense says that all slaves must unite, they have nothing to lose but their chains. So this is a very, very important aspect of Phule's thought, that people need to think about these issues collectively, and that is the only way in which change is possible, and there is nothing that will be lost except for these shackles of ignorance. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture.
Well, viewers, we have had a veritable feast of ideas from Dr. Payal Nagpal. She presented this intellectual activist in a way that would inspire generations. He inspired people in his own time. He can inspire people even today by his writing. So he's present there, and he's a carrier of one of the first persons, in the 19th century who is a carrier of modern ideas. Not merely at the level of philosophy, but at the level of actual work on the ground. So I think this scintillating lecture, we have to thank Professor Payal Nagpal for this, and we look forward to other discussions from you later in the program, and thanks a lot. And viewers, you are welcome to raise questions later and there is a rest there. So thank you all, and thanks Dr. Pranav.
Thank you, Professor.